Okay, first thing I want to say, women's history won't kill you.
I've been away from you a long time long. I never thought I'd miss you so. Somehow I feel your love was in you.
What is history? Why is it important in our lives? Is it just something we study in school, a rote memorization of facts and dates? Or is it something more profound and far-reaching? History is a complex and fascinating puzzle that pieces together a narrative of who we are based on where we've been. It includes where we have been as individuals, as groups of people, as movements, as ideologies, and as a nation. The past holds tremendous importance socially, culturally, and in our personal lives, and studying it provides a framework to understand why things exist as they do. The past, in the words of historian Doris Weatherford, is an essential prologue to the future. History surrounds our lives. Just take a look around you. Iconic statues dot the street of our nation's capital. Street names have meaning everywhere, and every year we pay homage to men, and sometimes women, whose actions have transcended time to touch our experience of life in the present. There is no question that the past and all that it encompasses shapes attitudes, expectations, and perspectives. But as essential as the study and knowledge of history is, it traditionally has excluded the majority of Americans. The standard field of U.S. history, for much of its existence, ignored and diminished the importance of women's lives, work, and experiences.
For much of the 20th century, the attitude was there was no women's history. If there was, it was private. Men achieved in public. Women had been dynamic mothers and caregivers, but they didn't have a public history. Yes, there was that Rosie the Riveter moment when women contributed to the Second World War, and of course there were nurses, and occasionally Hollywood stars. But aside from appropriate roles in pop culture, there wasn't a way to address how women, against all odds, had shaped their nation.
The brand of history that was long taught focused almost exclusively on white men, usually those in politics and the military, and women historians, as well as women's history, were relegated to the footnotes of our national story.
Women scholars and women's historians were generally omitted from the field of history because women in general were omitted from most of the professions, and particularly from the academic world, throughout the 19th and 20th century. Women were seldom admitted to graduate programs in history, and without masters and PhDs, they could not get jobs, academic jobs. So they were largely ignored and they were largely overlooked.
During the past few decades, many marginalized groups have worked to ensure that their voices, perspectives, historical experiences, and contributions be included in the telling of our national narrative and not be lost to obscurity. It was only about 3 decades ago that women's history began to solidify as an academic field, and since its foundation, the field has reshaped and redefined the field of U.S. history in many ways.
I think women's history has altered American history or U.S. history in a few different ways. First of all, it's filled the gaps. A lot of women have been missing from the standard version of U.S. history. And what women's history has done is identified women across a range of different fields and put them into U.S. women's history. So that's one thing. It's just really filled a huge gap. The second thing is it's really changed the categories of U.S. history. It's changed, a lot of U.S. history is about political history, it's about wars, it's about economic development and so forth. And women's history has directed the attention of historians to everyday life, to families, to the role of women as child rearers. It's directed the attention of historians to organizations. And these are not just marginal organizations or marginal movements, but they're really important organizations that brought many, many women into the public, into public space.
Women's history came to flourish in the 1970s and was born out of the social movements of the 1960s.
Feminism provided the momentum for the development of women's history, and not just of women's history, but of women's studies as a field more generally. In the 1960s and 1970s, as women began to mobilize and form what we call the women's movement, they began to understand that they wanted to know more about their past. They wanted to know more about their own past. They wanted to know more about the past of other women. And so they really created a demand for women's history. And a lot of the people who were activists in the women's movement went on to become women's historians. And as the movement grew and developed and actually branched out and even fractured, as African American women, Asian American women, Latinas, Chicanas, gays and lesbians came into the movement, they also wanted to know about their histories, and so that led to the development of other branches of women's history, Black women's history, Asian women's history, and so forth.
Though the field of women's history began to gain momentum in the 1970s, for as long as there has been a United States of America, there have been female historians. Mercy Otis Warren, for example, not only helped create the American Revolution with her anonymous anti-British plays, she also recorded the war's history in 3 handwritten volumes. Elizabeth Elliot published The Pioneer Women of the West in 1852, at a time when the West meant Indiana. Anna Julia Cooper, who earned her doctorate at France's famed Sorbonne and wrote her thesis in French, explored the experiences of African Americans, especially in A Voice from the South. And Julia Cherry Sparrill studied the differing past of white women in women's lives and work in the Southern colonies in 1930. Many female historians worked largely in isolation, unsupported by an academic home.
Many pursued research anyway on their own, outside of institutions, and of course this was very difficult, and it took a lot of courage and a lot of determination to carry on that research, but they did do it.
Angie DeVoe is a good example. After a lifetime of recording the history of Oklahoma's Indian tribes, including women, the American Historical Association finally honored her in 1988 when she was 98 years old. Much earlier, in 1915, Annie Heloise Abel published a 3-volume work on slaveholding among Native Americans, something that also affected women. Although she had a doctorate, this thoroughly researched work was published obscurely in Cleveland, Ohio, and Abel thought it important to put in parentheses on the title page that she was also Mrs. George Cockburn Henderson. Despite good academic credentials, historian Mary Ritter Beard also fought a lonely battle as a female historian. Born in Indianapolis in 1876, she graduated from DePaul University in 1897. She taught high school until 1900, when she married Charles Austin Beard, who went on to become an influential economic historian. While they both attended graduate school at Columbia University in New York, she joined the National American Woman Suffrage Association and became editor of The Woman Voter, the publication of the New York Woman Suffrage Party. In 1913, she co-founded the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage.
Mary Beard is a unique woman who was simultaneously a scholar and a suffragist. She was a woman who lived part of her life in the 19th century and part in the 20th. A great role model for me, living half my life in the 20th and half in the 21st. So you span centuries and generations. She was able to become an educated woman during a time when the so-called Seven Sisters were beginning to offer kind of classical education for women in an all-female environment in the East. And she ended up as a suffragist and an activist, being involved in helping to get the first women's archives organized, both Radcliffe Schlesinger Library and the Sophia Smith Library begin to generate collections of women's archives, in part because of the influence and activism of Mary Beard. She's also another person who made it clear that she was not necessarily going to look in her work at all the ways women should be equal to men. She supported the idea that women are also different from men, and as such they leave a legacy of specific activism and concerns, that there's a cultural womanhood and a difference that comes from women's differences that makes women reformers or invested in different social issues than men might be, or women are simply directed to those roles.
I've been away from you a long time, Mommy. I never thought I'd miss you so. Somehow I feel your love was real. With you, I long to be on board. The birds are singing in songtime, Mommy. The banks are drumming soft and low.